Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. Today my guest is Aidan Wing. Aiden owns and runs Wings of Nature, a company based in San Mateo County, California, United States. They produce honey, nucs, queens, provide education, pollination services, and they have a line of queens that has been sourced partly from the surrounding area, so they're preserving locally adapted traits. Aiden, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. So tell us how you got into queen breeding.
So, I kind of came to beekeeping in general kind of by mistake. And I was lucky that very early on in my beekeeping career, I was introduced to queen breeding. I became a beekeeper because I walked out of my cabin door one day and basically walked into a beekeeper. My neighbor was walking by with this guy and introduced me and said he was a beekeeper looking for locations to put hives, and he was interested in the property we lived in. So I got to talking to this guy, and he offered me to come out for a few days of labor. And when I came out, I was just blown away by these honeybees, and he kept asking me back. So I kept working for him, and soon it became a full-time thing, and eventually I started my own company. But when I first started working for him, he hired the folks from Zia Queen Bee, Melanie Kirby and Mark Spitzig, who live in New Mexico, to come out and do some consulting about queen breeding. He was hoping to have them there that following spring to kind of run a queen operation for him. So very early on, I met folks who were very engaged in queen breeding, and it became very evident to me the importance of queen breeding as part of running an apiary, of part of the true sustainability of beekeeping, because like any good animal husbandry, understanding reproduction of the species, and beyond that, breeding of the species was very important. So pretty early on in beekeeping, I started experimenting with bee breeding, at least queen rearing, I should say, and just got more and more into it over the years. My friends Mark and Melanie from Zia Queen Bee would come out every spring to do consultation for other beekeepers in California, and they'd often stop by, and we'd do some projects together. They introduced me to another woman named Megan Mahoney, who was working for queen breeders in California as well, and me and her became fast friends and learned a lot from her. And as well as the guy I worked for when I first had a job beekeeping, introduced me to Pat and Russell Highcomb of Highcomb's Honeybees in Orland, California, and was able to kind of glean a lot of important information from them as well. I've been doing it ever since.
Excellent. And so you're producing bees that are very specific to your area. Tell us how you've established those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I really believe in local adaptation. Even in the region that I live in, I see the vast amount of microclimates and the different ways that bees interact with their environment. And so to me, it's made sense that, a bee from a cold region of the world might not do as well in a place with mild winters and hot summers or vice versa, and just as within other plant breeding and animal breeding, over the millenniums, us humans have really created animals and plants that are really well adapted to a certain area. So I really truly believe in kind of the local adaptation philosophy. Um, so what that kind of means to me is just observation of honeybees and seeing what works well in your climate, what winters well, what makes it through dearths well, what maintains the right size nests for splitting and pollination, what can survive on less than, less external feed. And so over the years, I've gotten a lot of stock from wild honeybees that are in my area. I've always thought it's fascinating to see, sometimes we can have managed hives that are struggling so much and depending on so many human intervention to maintain them to healthy levels. And yet sometimes you open up a house or look in a tree cavity and you see a hive that is with no human intervention. It's just managed to stay healthy, managed to stay relatively free of diseases and keep low mite numbers and have enough nutrition to last through dearths and winters and such and so forth. So I think that's always an inspiring, metaphor, I guess, is how can these wild bees, look so good when sometimes the managed bees need so much help. But I'm a big fan of a lot of different bee breeders, so I really enjoy introducing other people's specialty queens or lines into my own and seeing how they react to my environment and seeing how they cross with my own bees, which are all mated.
So, what specific traits are you looking for when you buy breeder queens?
I think, really one of the things that's like the most important to me is mite resistance. And I think, we've had mites in this country for, 30 something years now. And that's just a blip of time on a kind of evolutionary scale. And really, I feel like if you left your bees, most stocks of honeybees, if you leave them, without any mite mitigation, you'll just the losses are just astronomical, and they do so much damage to honeybees on a physiological level as well as being the vectors of viruses. And so any type of bee that has any kind of leg up in the evolution against the pestilence of varroa mite is immediately a big priority to me, because it takes so much of our time and energy just to find some kind of equilibrium between bees and mites through management. So that's definitely a top priority, particularly in breeding for me. But beyond that, I really don't like to wear a big suit most of the time. I like working bees in the spring in a t-shirt and a veil. And so I want nice bees. And also, if I'm keeping these bees for a business, which is producing nucs and honey, so I also want productive bees. If I had bees that were amazingly mite resistant, but they just lived in these little teeny colonies and absconded and couldn't produce honey or enough brood to make splits, then that's kind of beside the point of doing this as a business.
So, how are you maintaining the lines that you're using?
So when I first started breeding bees, I had this concept in my mind that, like, you would start breeding bees, and you would have your goal in mind, and at some point you would attain your goal and have this like eureka moment of like your bees are this amazing, you've reached the goal, you've created this line, and that's that. But the longer I've done it, I've really began to view bee breeding as a journey, and I believe that it's almost like a conversation between the bee breeder, the bee, and the environment. It's never gonna reach a moment where you're going, okay, yeah, we have the line, it's good, we're done. It's a conscious act of breeding continually over the years. So by repeating similar, breeding selection protocol year to year, by adapting and always looking for new ways to breed or make it be more efficient, or hone in on your selection. So I believe, the lines are always changing, and that's kind of part of the beauty of the journey of bee breeding. It's an ever-moving journey.
And before I started recording, we were talking a little bit about how we're both fans of using your entire apiary, or many of your apiaries, as your breeding stock. So every hive that you have is a potential breeder, and using the genes in amongst all of your colonies as potential breeders. That's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I run a couple hundred colonies, and by at the beginning of the year, we'll start by looking at all these colonies as potential breeders, and you start to very quickly see hives that monitor hives that you see are highly potential, and other hives that are just not making the cut. So it's pretty quick that it whittles down to a much smaller nucleus of hives that you want to use in your breeding. I do a lot of work with Mark Spitzig of the Queen Bee, and this last year he had an idea that I thought was a really good idea. Our hives are overwintered, and they go for a few months of not being checked, and then they suddenly get opened kind of in the late winter, early spring. And at that point, they've started raising drones, and they often are making their drone comb in between the boxes. And when you open up an overwintered colony, often that drone comb breaks and exposes the pupa. And so what we started doing last year for the first time was, every time we'd open up a colony and we'd see that white drone pupa, immediately you can see the little red mites on them. And some of them have them and some of them don't. So it was almost an immediate, like, oh, if we start out seeing mites in the drone pupa right away, we're going to mark that and take that into account. And if we don't, we're going to mark that and take that into account. And that's taking something that we're already doing. We're already going and doing our first spring inspection. We're not doing any extra work for the breeding, but just by taking a little bit of data from that observation, we get a whole start on the whole breeding process of the year.
They love putting drones in between the boxes, don't they?
Yeah, they like, unless you put in specific drone comb, they like to make that drone comb wherever they can.
Yeah, well, I like to put in specific drone comb, and even still, they still like to put it between the boxes.
Yeah, exactly. Even when you do put the drone comb in, they'll still make it between boxes.
I've got this one particular drone mother that I was just checking it yesterday, and I put the drone comb in about a month ago, and they haven't touched it, but they've put drone comb between the boxes. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do a lot of bee work with your kids. Can you tell us what it's like doing beekeeping with your kids? Got any tips for us?
Yeah. So, I started beekeeping when my son was about 6 months old. And so my kids have been raised their entire life around bees and the bee business. And like most farming families, they've been very much, included by default in the family business. And over the years, the kids have learned to be quite good little beekeepers. So there's been moments where they're not happy to be the children of a beekeeper, that's for sure. But there's other times when they've been it's a beautiful life that we have together where we can work hand in hand. And definitely hands down my kid's favorite job is catching queens. And so during the spring throughout queen season, when it's a queen catching day, I'll bring my kids out. They love going through the mating nukes because they're small and so gentle, Most of the time, they don't even wear a veil. And they've got it down to where they can open up a nuke and find the queen typically faster than I can. And so on queen catching day, I've got a nice little crew. This year they're 11 and 13. My son Jelani's 13. My daughter Kiara is 11, and they'll go through and open the nukes, find a queen. They'll bring me over the comb with the queen on it and point her out. I'll catch and mark the queen and cage the queen, and they'll reassemble the nuke, feed, and they move so fast, the two of them together, that sometimes I don't even have a chance to open nukes. I'm just continually catching the queens that they bring me and caging them. And so, yeah, it's good to work with family. It's good to have the kids involved.
That's fantastic. Are you using those little polystyrene mating nukes?
What's really standard here in California is the mini mating nuke, which is a little styrofoam nuke with a few little small combs. We're using a size that's bigger than that. It's basically a half of a shallow comb, 3 combs that are the size of a half of a shallow. And those are versatile because you can make a box that fits 20 of those combs and it fits directly onto a standard sized colony. So if in the early spring you're needing, to get bees on that comb and get brood on those combs, you can put it in between the boxes of a strong colony, and they'll start laying eggs in that and rearing brood that you can then use in your mating nute. And I find that with that size, which is quite a small size, but not as small as the mini mating nukes, is they just have a little bit more autonomy as an actually functioning colony. I feel that they're able to have a little bit bigger population, that they actually have foragers bringing in nectar and pollen, and I feel that it's a little bit better care of the queen because of that than the really, really small ones.
And they're the same material as the small ones?
No, we actually use wooden ones.
Okay.
They do make styrofoam of that size. Companies like Man Lake over here make a styrofoam box, which is may even be a superior product because of the insulation of styrofoam. But I just personally cannot stand using that much styrofoam foam in my operation. I live in the forest. There's lots of wood around. Styrofoam just doesn't have the same feel to me.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Okay, so can you recommend any queen breeding resources that you've used over the years?
Yeah, say the best resource is just community, Um being part of being part of a community of other bee breeders has really been hands down the best tool, the best resource that I've had ability to. I was feel very lucky in that, as I kind of described earlier, my connections with Dia Queen Bee and Megan Mahoney of Mahoney Queen Bees. Also, some of the larger California bee breeders like the Hycomb's honeybees and the Pancrats family of Can-Am apiaries. So making friends in the industry, I found that people have been amazingly willing to share. That instead of holding their secrets and keeping their trade secrets close to their chest, it's been quite the opposite. People have been very welcoming. People have been happy to take phone calls when problems have come up. They've been happy to offer solutions, happy to offer used equipment for sale, such and so forth. So just community. There's both, community, kind of natural community like that, making friends, but also there are groups, special interest groups, conferences and stuff like that. Just recently we started a group in the States called ABBA, which I believe is the American Bee Breeders Association. And my friend Melanie Kirby kind of spearheaded that, and it's a relatively new. No, it's not the American. It's the Adaptive Bee Breeders Association, and it's a new kind of a new group that we've created to talk about some of the things that we face. And we've had online meetings, but we're having our first official meeting this winter at the American Beekeeping Federation conference in Florida.
That's a great acronym. I bet it gets a little bit of
ABBA.
Confusion.
Pretty easy to remember.
Yeah. So is there anything you're currently working on that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I'd like to talk about that we didn't. I just maybe rewind and talk about this that kind of leads to the present is in 2019 I was able to get a grant through SARE, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education here in the States, and I got a grant to kind of design a breeding program. And in a really short way, what I learned is the first thing I did was I designed a very complicated bee breeding program where we looked at these minute, I wanted to look at every month at nosema spores and just really intricate things like that. But in a nutshell, what I learned from this grant was that actually simplicity is the best way to actually achieve goals as a bee breeder. If you get too complicated and too heady, you may never ever be able to achieve what you've set forth to do. The more you can kind of simplify your breeding protocol and simplify your desired traits, you're going to have much more success in reaching those goals. And one of those things that I really felt I learned through this grant was that, as beekeepers, you go into your apiary and you'll just see one or two hives that you're like, oh, I love these hives. These are my favorite hives in this apiary. And then you monitor all your hives, write down whatever data is important to you in your breeding program. And often at the very end of the year, it's those few hives that you've just loved all along were your best hives. So we have a lot of intuition as beekeepers that can really direct some of the bee breeding work we do. We know what a good hive looks like. And actually by kind of simplifying things, sometimes we can attain our goals much more.
That's excellent. Thanks, Aiden. Yeah. So tell us where we can find you online.
Well, I have a website that's wingsofnaturebees.com. I'm more of a hands-on bee guy than an internet guy, but every now and again I update things to have pertinent information. Send out a newsletter. You can subscribe. I have an Instagram account and a Facebook account, which is Wings of Nature Bees. So I try and post fun pictures every now and again and kind of show the projects I'm working on.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Um, Good luck getting through the bogs and the mud. And California, we say we have two seasons, the fire season and the mud season. So stay dry, but not too dry.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. All right. Thanks a lot. Okay. Well, hope you enjoyed that chat with Aiden. Really good piece of advice there. He said that our best resource is our collaboration. I thought that was a really interesting and good point. If you want to get in touch with Aiden, you can at wingsofnaturebees.com. Jump on there and see what he's been up to. If you want to get in touch with me, you can at nixonbees.com.au. And until next time, thanks so much for tuning in.